As he entered the hotel bar, the CEO's gaze fell upon a black man who was quietly enjoying a glass of whiskey, mistakenly assuming he was a server. The CEO wasted no time in launching a barrage of insults. Only when his assistant brought it to his attention did he come to a startling realization. The individual he had just belittled was among the most influential players in the investment arena, yet rather than experiencing any guilt, he resolved to orchestrate a scheme to destroy him. At the year's most pivotal conference the following day, what he never anticipated was that his own avarice, bias, and unrestrained pride would pull him into the abyss of destruction. The Monarch Grand stood as a bastion of strength, a realm where the air appeared to embody the burdens of affluence, aspiration, and a serene strategic authority. The expansive lobby extended beneath the lofty decorative ceilings, a warm radiance pouring from the chandelier's elaborate crystals, shimmering across the gleaming marble floors, the aroma of blooming, orchids intertwined with the deep smoky essence of matured bourbon drifting from the adjacent bar. Every movement within the space was deliberate. Impeccably dressed individuals engaged in handshakes that carried immense value, whispered dialogues woven with concealed deals and unspoken conflicts. This was more than merely a hotel. It was a battleground where influence changed ownership through agreements, partnerships, and at times, strategic devastation. Cameron Hayes glided through the revolving doors, exuding a confidence that stemmed from an unshakable sense of belonging, even in the face of others' denial. He moved with a subtle confidence, never drawing attention to himself. Yet his presence commanded acknowledgement. His navy suit exuded sophistication, tailored flawlessly to his robust physique, while his tie remained crisp, subtle, and undeniably refined. In one hand he held a leather briefcase, in the other a phone that vibrated, with opportunities ready to be seized, choices that could alter the course of entire sectors. Just the mention of his name could send shockwaves through the markets. He strode past the check-in desk, disregarding the discreet glance from the concierge who was taken aback by the presence of a man like him, black, commanding, and exuding confidence as he navigated this space with unwavering assurance. He had grown accustomed to that response. It hardly registered with him anymore. Simultaneously, from the opposite side of the room, another man made his entrance. Garrett Langford, the visionary leader at Argan Industries, a man whose presence in any room commanded attention, not through charm, not through admiration, but because he had forged a path on the unwavering conviction that everyone was either inferior to him or a means to an end. His pace was measured, intentional, a figure familiar with the universe yielding to his desires. The elegance of his fitted black suit, the shine of his platinum Rolex, the subtle arrogance carved into the defined features of his face, all conveyed a singular message: unquestionable privilege. As he moved forward, Eleanor Watts followed closely, her heels making a gentle rhythm on the marble floor, an iPad held tightly against her chest while she perused the list of the evening's key attendees. She was adept, insightful, and had dedicated almost 10 years to maneuvering through Garrett's realm, making certain his empire operated seamlessly. And yet after all those years, she remained little more than a mere accessory in his perception, an entity defined by its purpose rather than by individual characteristics. Garrett hardly seemed to notice her presence. His focus drifted, fixated, on the time gleaming from his watch, a subtle hint of annoyance flitting across his face. 3 minutes behind schedule. Not acceptable. He loathed the act of waiting. Time equated to wealth, and his was far too precious to waste in a crowded lobby filled with individuals unworthy of his recognition. He let out a sharp breath and pivoted toward the bar. If he was going to bide his time, he might as well do it with a drink in hand. The bar exuded an air of exclusivity, with its rich mahogany-paneled walls, soft ambient lighting, and bottles of liquor that had aged longer than some of the conference attendees. The individuals who remained in that space were the sort who communicated in hushed tones, with each of their transactions influencing markets, financial systems, and political landscapes. Garrett sensed a deep familiarity in this place. Suddenly his eyes caught sight of an anomaly in the surroundings. A gentleman, isolated, deeply hued, elegantly attired. Of course, but that held no significance. Black men in tailored suits were often seen as entertainers, athletes, or mere symbols of someone else's wealth. They didn't hold the reins. They did not have a rightful place in this setting. Without hesitation, without considering any other option, Garrett pushed his empty glass along the bar, halting it just before the man's, and he ordered whiskey, hardly lifting his gaze. Reduce the ice. Stillness. He drummed his fingers on the sleek bar top, his attention already drifting to his phone, anticipating the seamless, unspoken obedience of a staff member fulfilling their duties. Silence. His fingers paused. His annoyance sharpened into something more intense. What is happening? Are you taking your time? His voice was icy, sharp with the irritation of someone unaccustomed to being overlooked. I can't stay here forever. Nothing yet. At that moment, Garrett raised his gaze, truly examined. The figure before him stood still, not grasping the glass, not responding in any way. Instead, he remained seated, his fingers mindlessly outlining the edge of his drink, his eyes unwavering, serene and inscrutable. For the very first time, Garrett truly laid eyes on him, neither a bartender nor a hotel staff member, a gentleman. The type of man Garrett couldn't quite comprehend, as authority in his realm never manifested in this way. It didn't resemble him. His jaw tightened, his lip instinctively curling. Are you employed here, or not? A moment of stillness. At last, the man raised the empty glass a mere inch from the counter, then placed it back down with a measured slowness, producing a gentle clink against the marble. Garrett's eye twitched with a subtle intensity. At that moment the man began to speak. I am not employed here. His voice resonated with a deep, steady calmness. Garrett's eyes fluttered open. He couldn't quite pinpoint the reason, but the manner in which the words were delivered caused a knot to form in his stomach. Then he let out a hearty laugh, brief, curt, uninterested. Is that so? He inclined his head, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth, laced with derision. So what exactly brings you here? Protection? Driver? Or perhaps someone showed you some kindness and handed you a complimentary ticket to the event? Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, her fingers gripping her iPad with intensity. She knew the man standing before them. She had spotted his name on the VIP list, the very list she had been perusing just moments earlier. Yet Garrett was far too engulfed in his own hubris to recognize it. The man remained unperturbed, refusing to take the hook. He allowed the silence to linger, permitting its heaviness to envelop the distance that lay between them. At last, a smile graced his face, neither in jest nor in fury, in comprehension. I am ready to make an investment. The words fell heavily, creating ripples that spread across the surface. Garrett's smirk wavered for the briefest moment. His fingers grazed the edge of his untouched glass, a nearly instinctive gesture, as if seeking something to anchor him. In an instant, he simply turned away. Termination. Regaining authority. Aintar. Error. A realization that would come only when the moment had passed. Garrett Langford dismissed the exchange from his mind entirely. Not at this moment. He had disregarded the man Cameron Hayes. Garrett, indifferent to the importance of names, brushed aside anything that failed to capture his interest. He refocused on his drink, allowing the chatter of another executive to wash over him, muffling the annoyance that lingered at the periphery of his thoughts. Yet a certain feeling remained, a subtle, creeping unease. The man's gaze had held a certain intensity that lingered in his mind, not with fury, not with fear, but with something far more insidious, assurance, the sort of assurance that stemmed from authority, true authority. The kind Garrett had never linked to a black man who wasn't either on the basketball court or giving a speech about diversity initiatives. The revelation left him feeling uneasy. The evening lingered on. The atmosphere thrummed with whispered exchanges and the quiet crafting of alliances under the gentle illumination of the chandeliers. Garrett navigated his role with ease, offering handshakes and empty promises, sharing smiles with those who would betray him just as swiftly as he would do to them. Eleanor stayed by his side. Quiet yet observant, her fingers danced rapidly across the iPad, meticulously noting each introduction, every deal, and all possible leverage points. She possessed the experience to sense when something was amiss. There was an unsettling feeling in the air. She noticed it in the way Garrett frequently looked back at the bar, where Cameron continued to sip his drink, seemingly unfazed by the events that had unfolded. She noticed it in the tension of his jaw, the grip of his fingers around the glass, the unfamiliar sting of his wounded pride. Eleanor had devoted years to observing Garrett as he skillfully manipulated, ruthlessly destroyed, and callously discarded anyone who dared to inconvenience him. What about this? This was more than a mere inconvenience. This was a minor public humiliation. Garrett Langford had a zero-tolerance policy for anything that made him appear foolish. A solitary question emerged, whispered softly enough that only Eleanor could catch its faint echo. Who is that individual? Eleanor paused, uncertainty flickering in her mind. The manner in which he posed the question, the edge in his tone, sent a shiver of discomfort coursing through her. She understood the trajectory of this situation, recognized the inevitable conclusion for anyone who dared to cross Garrett's pride. Yet she was aware that lingering too long was not an option. Cameron Hayes, she replied with caution, creator of Hayes Capital. He focuses on technology acquisitions and has investments in many of the leading companies in Silicon Valley. Garrett let out a derisive laugh, swirling his whiskey in the glass, before finishing the last of it in one swift motion. Investments in technology, he reiterated, his tone laced with scorn. Naturally, I can see it now. Some fortunate stock selections, a handful of government funding, and suddenly he believes he belongs among us. Eleanor remained silent. She understood the kind of reaction Garrett was seeking. She understood that if she consented, if she nourished his disdain, it would merely stoke the flames of what she already perceived taking shape in his thoughts. Yet, she was wise enough to refrain from confronting him directly. She remarked that he is a serious player. Last year, Argon Industries even sought his support. Garrett stilt. Eleanor witnessed the instant when everything fell into alignment. A spark of familiarity, a recollection emerging, one that Garrett had evidently concealed under the weight of his own hubris. A gathering took place last year. His team had advocated for it, firmly believing that securing Cameron Hayes as an investor would enable Argon Industries to take the lead in the AI sector. Garrett scarcely gave the file a second look before discarding it carelessly. Not worth the trouble. That was precisely his response. And now here was Cameron Hayes seated in the same room as him, navigating the same circles, wielding the same influence, if not greater. And worst of all, he had made Garrett Langford, a man who took great pride in his control, appear diminished. Garrett's hold on his glass grew firmer. The recollection seared into his mind, intertwining with the recent sharp pang of embarrassment. From before, his breath flowed steadily, deliberate, as a shadowy and malevolent thought began to take hold. Negative. Absolutely not. He would never permit this. He had constructed his realm through authority, making certain that individuals, like Cameron, understood their position, and if Cameron had managed to evade detection, had somehow persuaded others of his rightful place here, Garrett would be there to set the record straight. He turned to Eleanor, his voice softer, deeper, tinged with an unsettling edge. I desire to know all there is about him. Eleanor's fingers stilled above her screen. Garrett's eyes were fixed on Cameron, his face a mask of mystery. Yet Eleanor could perceive it in the defined angles of his jaw, the steadiness of his breath, the way his whole being tensed with an unvoiced but unmistakable energy. This transcended mere business. This went beyond a mere mix-up at the bar. This held deep significance. Eleanor absorbed the gravity of his request, a dense presence anchoring in her chest. She had encountered this previously, understood the significance when Garrett focused his attention on an individual. He never faced them directly. He maintained his composure, refusing to resort to the outbursts that lesser individuals often displayed. No, his annihilation was always devoid of emotion, meticulously planned and exacting. A controversy unfolds here. A fabricated narrative emerges there, a subtle suggestion to the right person, a gentle push to the appropriate reporter, a quiet conversation with a willing authority. He had crafted his profession around transforming men into phantoms, obliterating their presence from boardrooms, from the media, from the very fabric of history. At this moment, Cameron Hayes found himself in the line of sight. Eleanor paused, if only for a brief moment, a perilous moment. With deliberate thought, she inclined her head in agreement. "I'll explore what's out there." Garrett let out a slow, contented breath and reclined in his chair, his confidence re-establishing itself, a smirk gradually reappearing on his face. "Good," he whispered, "for I desire his departure." Eleanor hurried along. She consistently did. When she finally stepped back into her hotel suite that night, her fingers danced across the keyboard, gathering every piece of information she could uncover about Cameron Hayes. Investigations, monetary histories, business documentation, anything that could be distorted, exploited, transformed into a vulnerability. She toiled quietly, the soft light of her laptop illuminating her features, the gravity of her task feeling more burdensome than ever. Garrett's voice lingered in her mind. "I desire his absence." She had seen men fall apart before Garrett Langford. It was always quiet, always orderly. It was a gradual, deliberate decline with agreements collapsing inexplicably, unfounded claims capturing attention, murmured uncertainties circulating among the elite until a presence vanished without a trace. It was a form of strength that many were unaware of, the ability to wipe away. Yet on this occasion, there was an unmistakable change. She gazed at Cameron's file, perusing years of meticulous investments, shrewd yet ethical acquisitions, a kingdom forged through exactitude, free from controversy, devoid of vulnerabilities, and absent of careless excesses. He had exercised caution, perhaps excessively so. That rendered him perilous. Garrett was relentless in his pursuit. He would not rest until he uncovered something, and if it didn't exist, he would bring it into being. Eleanor inhaled deeply, her fingers hovering above the keyboard. For 8 years she orchestrated the vanishing of Garrett's foes, nurturing his pride, concealing his misdeeds, and safeguarding his invulnerability. It was her responsibility. What made this experience feel distinct? She shut the laptop with a decisive click. On the morrow. She would take care of it tomorrow. Garrett tossed and turned, unable to find rest that night. There was no necessity for him to do so. He had reached his conclusion, and that alone was sufficient to sustain his drive. The annoyance from earlier had crystallized into something more intense, more precise. By dawn, it would be set in motion. The conference hall hummed with excitement. This was the pivotal occasion, the instant when major players in the industry revealed news that caused stock prices to either skyrocket or dive. Agreements would be subtly exchanged through firm grips, dynasties would transform, and legacies would either solidify or crumble. Garrett navigated the crowd effortlessly, his aura as commanding as ever, each exchange underscoring the inherent hierarchy of the world where figures like him established the norms, relegating individuals like Cameron Hayes to mere footnotes. As he approached the front row, the sensation washed over him once more. That essence. Cameron stood by the stage, immersed in a hushed dialogue with another investor. In contrast to Garrett, he was not in the act of performing. He wasn't occupying the space with superfluous gestures, contrived charm, or deliberate hostility. He stood there unwavering, calm, exuding a strength that Garrett found perplexing. It grated on his nerves. He pivoted, discovering Eleanor beside him. "Whisper to me that you possess something," he murmured. She paused, uncertainty flickering in her eyes, excessively lengthy. Garrett's jaw clenched. "Is there really nothing?" His voice was soft, measured, yet Eleanor sensed the tempest lurking just below the surface. She let out a breath, angling the iPad just enough for him to catch a glimpse of the screen. Everything is an illusion, free from scandals, devoid of controversies, and lacking any weaknesses. This is the most pristine portfolio I have ever encountered. Garrett's demeanor remained stoic, yet Eleanor noticed the subtle twitch of his jaw and the brief flash of something perilous in his gaze. He let out a slow breath, his lips twisting into a shape that barely resembled a smile. Then, we create one. Eleanor sensed a change in the atmosphere surrounding them. She had anticipated this moment, and now it was unstoppable. Eleanor had witnessed it previously, the manner in which Garrett's thoughts operated when he resolved that someone must be obliterated. It wasn't impulsive. It was a deliberate choice. It was intentional, a gradual, systematic disintegration of an individual's life. His reputation was forged through it, not merely as an entrepreneur, but as a master tactician, a man who has always triumphed, a figure who dismantled barriers, with the subtle accuracy of a skilled artisan crafting a masterpiece. And now Cameron Hayes was within his focus. She observed Garrett leaning back, his expression a mystery, fingers rhythmically tapping on the edge of his chair. The murmur of dialogue enveloped the space, the excitement of the conference building with every fleeting second. Yet lurking beneath the surface, a chill was beginning to take hold. "We don't need proof," Garrett murmured, his voice barely above, a whisper meant only for her ears. "A narrative is all we require." Eleanor remained still, yet within her a wave of discomfort surged, more profound than ever. His tone was unwavering, leaving no room for debate. He had resolved his thoughts. Garrett's eyes were fixed on Cameron, observing him navigate the throng, exchanging handshakes with individuals Garrett had previously deemed steadfastly loyal. The confidence with which Cameron conducted himself, coupled with the attention he commanded from others, posed a significant issue. "Share a hint," Garrett whispered, his tone steady and composed. "Keep it understated. Insights into insider trading. An exclusive arrangement that ought not to have taken place. Just the right amount of smoke to prompt people to seek out the flames." Eleanor felt her heart race, yet she remained silent. Garrett pressed on, deftly adjusting the cuff of his sleeve. "We ensure that someone discovers something." She swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the iPad with increasing intensity. She had dedicated years to meticulously planning these kinds of takedowns, weaving stories that shattered careers before the truth could ever emerge. Yet, on this occasion, there was a distinct change. In this moment, she paused. Garrett observed. He tilted his head slightly, his eyes darting to her for just a moment. "Issue." Eleanor compelled herself to inhale, compelled herself to maintain his gaze. She devoted years to mastering the craft of impartiality, becoming the individual Garrett relied on, as she never wavered, never doubted. But now, with Cameron Hayes sitting just a few feet away, unaware of the battle unfolding around him, she experienced a sensation she hadn't encountered in ages. Uncertainty. Uncertainty. Having someone like Garrett Langford nearby was a perilous situation. "No problem," she said, her voice steady and calm. Garrett wore a sly grin. "Excellent." Moreover, he pivoted once more towards the stage, anticipation hanging in the air. The performance was on the verge of starting. The conference hall was filled to capacity. Neatly arranged chairs extended in a line toward the enormous LED screen that commanded the stage, its modern corporate aesthetic serving as a setting for the most influential personalities in the industry. Cameras clicked, journalists whispered in eager suspense, and the soft buzz of muted dialogues enveloped the atmosphere like a charged current poised to ignite. Garrett Langford occupied the front row, his legs crossed and hands folded neatly in his lap, radiating an air of effortless confidence as if he had already claimed victory. He scarcely caught the introductions, hardly acknowledged the courteous applause as another executive stepped into the spotlight. His thoughts drifted, meticulously piecing together the last elements of the scheme he had initiated. At this point, the murmurs would have begun. A suggestion, unseen yet trustworthy enough to capture the interest of those who matter. A rumored disclosure regarding Cameron Hayes' participation in insider trading, a transaction that raises serious ethical concerns and may even cross legal boundaries. There was no evidence. It was unnecessary. Garrett dedicated his life to unraveling the intricacies of perception. It transcended the boundaries of reality. It concerned the essence of reality. A strategically positioned uncertainty, a thoughtfully orchestrated narrative, a notion sown in the perfect intellect. and Cameron would fall apart. Garrett permitted a subtle smirk to cross his lips as he cast a sidelong glance at Eleanor, who remained tense and unmoving beside him. Her silence had lingered since he issued the command, yet it held no significance. She understood the task at hand. Suddenly, a shift on the stage drew his attention. Cameron Hayes. He entered the spotlight with an effortless ease, his stance relaxed and assured, embodying a confidence that felt authentic rather than rehearsed. A lesser individual might have faltered beneath the pressure of a room brimming with billionaires, CEOs, and media predators on the lookout for vulnerability, yet Cameron remained poised with the calm assurance of one who was meant to be there. Garrett experienced a familiar ache in his chest, a long-buried bitterness that remained unnamed, yet had always lingered within him. This was not what he deserved. Garrett hardly caught the initial phrases of Cameron's address, something regarding sustainable investment strategies, the future of tech funding, the same refined rhetoric that everyone employed. It was of no consequence. It wouldn't hold significance for long. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. Garrett looked down, anticipating a sign that the narrative had reached the appropriate avenues. However, the message was not what he anticipated. It would be wise to direct your gaze towards the screen. His heartbeat gradually diminished. His gaze darted upward, and the LED display behind Cameron shimmered to life. For an instant, the Argon Industries logo dominated the scene, the polished symbol of Garrett's domain before it dissolved into static. Next, the auditory experience, a sound, clear, undeniable. Proof is unnecessary. A narrative is all we require. Garrett's breath hitched. The atmosphere became hushed. The screen cleared, revealing a video that was grainy, yet the audio remained crisp and clear. Garrett's voice, deep and measured, echoed the words he had uttered only hours before. Share a hint. Insights into insider trading. Keep it understated. Just the right amount of intrigue to spark curiosity about the source. A wave of astonished whispers coursed through the crowd, reminiscent of the ocean retreating before an impending tsunami. Garrett's heart pounded fiercely within his chest. His body tensed up. No, this simply couldn't be real. However, the video was not yet complete. The visuals transformed, monitoring the hotel premises, a hallway bathed in soft, muted light. Garrett held the phone to his ear. Next, we ensure that someone discovers something. The words resonated through the speakers, sharp and sudden like a gunshot, piercing the stillness of a quiet room. The whisper escalated into a thunderous clamor. Journalists sprang into action, cameras clicking furiously, individuals murmuring, leaning in closer, sharing astonished looks. The term insider trading loomed ominously, yet it was not linked to Cameron Hayes, connected to Garrett Langford. A chilling unease slithered up Garrett's spine. His fingers clutched the edge of his seat, nails digging into the leather. His mouth felt parched. His heartbeat throbbed in his ears. This was more than a mere success. This was a decisive act. In that instant, just when everything seemed to be slipping further from his grasp, Cameron made a turn. Gradually his eyes locked onto Garrett's, and he beamed, not a hint of a smile, not hubris, only the calm, unwavering assurance of someone who had already triumphed. Garrett felt a tumultuous churn in his stomach. His thoughts raced in a chaotic dance seeking a way out, yet the harm was irrevocably inflicted. He sensed it deeply, a change in the atmosphere, the burden of his own expressions pressing like a sharp edge against his neck. Eleanor remained still beside him. She was not obligated to, for Garrett was aware this was her doing. Garrett Langford sensed the ground shift beneath him. The conference hall, once a domain of his unchallenged authority, now enveloped him in a stifling atmosphere. The walls closing in, the pressure of 100 gazes searing into his flesh. His own voice lingered in the atmosphere, repeating in his thoughts like an ominous decree. No evidence is necessary. A narrative is all we require. He could perceive the sharp intakes of breath, the frantic murmurs, the discreet rustling of individuals who had previously stood by his side now slowly distancing themselves. He tightened his jaw, compelling himself to remain motionless, to stifle the raw instinct gnawing at his core, fight or flee. He felt the urge to strike back, to seize the reins of the story before it unraveled beyond his grasp. However, the moment had passed. The evidence was unequivocally incriminating. It was deadly. And Cameron Hayes had presented it in a manner that was unmistakable. The atmosphere grew heavy as journalists pressed in, their inquiries a tumultuous blend of urgency, with cameras erupting in bursts of light. "Mr. Langford, will you refute these allegations? Was Argon Industries implicated in fabricating evidence against Cameron Hayes? Could this be the conclusion of your professional journey?" Garrett gulped with difficulty. His mouth was parched, thoughts swirling in a frantic search for a solution, a way out. Yet the confines were tightening too quickly. He glanced at Eleanor, anticipating what exactly? A justification, a plan of action, a beacon of hope. Yet she had already departed, positioned not beside him but behind the crowd, her arms folded, her expression inscrutable. Absolutely. It was something he ought to have anticipated. The instant expanded, drawn out by the heavy burden of understanding. She had never stood by his side. She had merely been biding her time. In regard to this, his body tensed as security made their way to the stage, their movements deliberate yet unmistakable. They had no intention of coming for Cameron. They were approaching him. The cacophony enveloped him, phrases intertwining into an indistinct murmur. He could grasp the situation without needing to listen. He had crafted his existence by unraveling the lives of others, dismantling careers and transforming formidable figures into mere echoes of their past selves. He had mastered this game like no one else, and now it was turned against him. As security approached, his body reacted with an involuntary jerk. "Get your hands off me," he snapped, his voice slicing through the chaos like a sharp blade, his final effort to assert dominance, his final declaration of authority. Yet it was devoid of substance. He noticed it in the way people observed. Not with trepidation, absolutely. The same confidence that had enveloped Cameron Hayes like a protective shield the previous night. He was utterly alone, with no hope of rescue. He had reached his limit. As he was led away from the hall, the ultimate strike came not from the reporters, not from the cameras, and not even from the lingering accusations that filled the atmosphere. Cameron was the one, remaining on stage, poised and attentive, observing him closely. As Garrett was ushered through the doors, Cameron pivoted back to the podium, fine-tuned the microphone, and seamlessly resumed his speech without a pause. As if Garrett Langford had never held any significance at all. By morning, the consequences had fully unfolded. The headlines circulated rapidly, each one more incriminating than the previous. In a shocking turn of events, the CEO of Argon Industries, Garrett Langford, finds himself at the center of a market manipulation scandal. Investigations are underway regarding allegations of corporate sabotage, leading to a dramatic decline in stock prices as investors rapidly distance themselves from the unfolding crisis at Argon. In a matter of hours, the board acted decisively, releasing an urgent statement to separate themselves from their recently ousted CEO. As the clock struck noon, federal investigators meticulously sifted through a trove of financial documents, laying the groundwork for a criminal case that was unfolding before their eyes. Garrett Langford had dedicated years to shaping his reputation into an indomitable presence, a name that evoked both fear and admiration. At this point, it had become a burden. A story of warning. The men who had once clung to his every utterance now shunned his name as if it were toxic. As the markets drew to a close, his empire was plummeting uncontrollably. Eleanor observed the scene from a distance, her phone buzzing, with notifications, calls, emails, and press inquiries, yet she chose to disregard them all. She had no desire to rescue the remnants of Argon Industries. She had accomplished what was necessary. After so long, she finally found herself breathing. With ease, Garrett had misjudged her capabilities. Just as he had misjudged Cameron Hayes, he believed that power was the domain of men like him, boisterous, privileged, and endlessly hungry for more. Yet genuine strength resided in a more subdued form. Exhibit greater patience. It quietly made its presence known. It just lingered, and when the moment arrived, it vanished. Cameron lingered by the window of his penthouse suite, observing the bustling city beneath him, the lights of Manhattan twinkling like a tapestry of dreams. The world continued its relentless march forward. It consistently has. The device vibrated in his pocket. A message from an investor, affirming what he was already aware of. Argon Industries had come to an end. He let out a slow breath, placing the phone on the surface with care. There was a complete absence of gloating. No festivities. Garrett Langford had attempted to wipe him from existence. Instead, Cameron had caused him to vanish. The distinction: Cameron had no reason to fabricate the truth. The truth was sufficient. Come along and engage with us by liking and subscribing to share in our impactful narratives. Be sure to activate the notification bell to begin your day with deep insights and genuine compassion.